You're listening to Nothing Small About Business, where big thinking meets real world action. Ready to level up? Let's get into it.
Today's episode is going to be a little bit different because today in the studio, we have a very special guest, my husband and business partner, Dan Press. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
So the reason we wanted to do some of these is because sometimes we have some very interesting conversations around businesses and we come from such different perspectives. So we thought it would be fun to record some episodes, kind of gaining our perspectives, in those different areas.
Yeah, just trying to have a normal conversation and hopefully get a little vulnerable too at times.
All right. So one topic that we've been discussing recently that I find very interesting and gaining awareness around this and having conversations has been eye-opening. And that is all centered around the idea of small business mindset versus entrepreneur mindset.
Yeah, when you've brought that up in the past, it's really interesting because as you and I know, but I don't think this is something that we've ever talked about with anyone else, is just how different of a place that we come from. And I'll be honest, 5 years ago, I would have thought that if we had this kind of conversation, I would have almost been offended for me to say that I have a small business mindset versus somebody else who might have more of an entrepreneur mindset. So I'm curious though, and one of the things that you and I talked about is how do you even define a small business and what's the difference between the two?
Yeah. So I listened to a lot of podcasts. Obviously, we listen to some of the same ones. And this sparked an idea of, were you going into it with a small business mindset or do you go into it with an entrepreneurial mindset? And I realized in that moment that you have a very small business mindset and I have a very entrepreneurial mindset. So colliding those two worlds can be very interesting.
Why does it sound so insulting?
But
Right?
it's not insulting. So that is the key, is that it's really important to know that not one is better than the other, in my opinion. And I think it really comes down to understanding what your goals are and what you want. And I think that you having a small business mindset is really important because that's where your passion lies. And a perfect example of the way that I was thinking about this in my head, we own Park Ridge Vision. So that is a single location optometry practice in our town. In my head, I'm like, let's open the mothership and call it Town Vision. And then we can open up Park Ridge Vision and Glenview Vision, Northbrook Vision, Wheaton Vision, and we can have all of these different offices. When I bring that up to you, you're like, that is my worst nightmare.
Right. Yeah, because for me, it's not that it's my worst nightmare. It's that it almost feels that in moving to Chicago from New Jersey and starting Park Ridge Vision, I bought out an existing practice, but we've had to make it our own. As the small business owner, you put your blood, sweat, and tears and so much time into this that the idea of trying to do this again and building another one seems so daunting. But I understand that the big business world works very differently. And I had never really differentiated the two myself. And, the sound of it is amazing in terms of, yeah, let's just do more of these. But then it also comes, there are times where I think about, what's enough. We have a very successful practice, and I think that we are successful because we're authentic and we have a specialization that not a lot of other people do, and it's hard to recreate a specialty. So and we have patients that come to us from all over. Forget about these local towns. There are people that come from a distance because of the reputation that we have. So it just seems challenging to think about recreating it when it feels like there's been so much time and effort to just do the one. And then beyond that, the whole idea of how much is enough.
Right.
I feel very fortunate to be where we are.
Yeah. Which I think, you're the heartbeat of that practice. And so you give so much of yourself to it. I come in with a different perspective because I'm more the bigger picture idea generator, but you're the one actually doing the day-to-day, seeing the patients, and you put so much heart and passion into it, and that's what has been so successful with the practice. That's what the patients see. So I completely understand your perspective, and it's very valid that it makes sense to just do what you do and do it really, really well in that one location.
Yeah. And, I feel that we've we've always said this. I remember talking to a colleague of mine, who's a different generation, when he was actually around when we first started dating 20 years ago. And after we had gotten married, your life came from the television background and like this totally different world than anything that I've ever been accustomed to and ever seen before. And my entire upbringing has been, and for those of us who don't know, my father is an optometrist. My grandfather is an optometrist. And I grew up around this business, so to speak. And to see or to have you in my life who's got this, really different ideas and had grown up with such a different household and perspective, for me, it was when I was talking to this colleague slash mentor of mine, I described it as, baseball analogy that you're going to be swinging for the fences and I'm going to be taking walks and trying to hit singles, just get on base.
But thank God for that, because if we were both swinging for the fences, like who knows where we'd be. So I do think a huge component to this is having that balance, because as we say, like nothing would start without me, but nothing would finish without you. So I think it's recognizing where your strengths are and where my strengths are, letting us live in our own lanes, but like letting those lanes cross here and there when it makes sense to do it. And I think we've done a really good job recently is having those conversations. So if I do have a really big idea, I, to a fault, will never be an analysis paralysis. Like that will never happen to me, because if something comes as an idea, I'm like, let's go, let's do it right now. You will do the opposite. You're like, let's first deny it, say, no, we're not doing that. But then you'll think on it and really analyze it, which both are really important, because you want to get going, but you also need to make sure that you're looking at it from all different angles so that you're properly prepared and not just wasting your time, energy, and money.
Yeah. And I think that it's a matter of being able to surround yourself, and we've talked about this before, with people who are able to fill in the gaps that you may have. And yeah, taking big risks is not in my nature, especially when it comes to, the source of primary income that we're going to have for our family. It was slow and steady, very methodical, one step at a time versus, just moving forward and just doing something, because it felt as if the small business mindset is going to be more risk averse. Something that I graduated optometry school. I never had any background in business. And I wonder how many small business owners go through and have an MBA. I wonder what those statistics
So
are.
that's what's so fascinating. Like doctors, all these private practice owners, you learn so much about your trade, but then you never learn how to run a business. And you're essentially equally a business owner as you are an eye doctor, but you've gone through all this training as an eye doctor, zero training as a business owner. So those are like, you're learning that on the streets as you go.
And I feel like that, part of what feeds into this small business versus the entrepreneurship, and it's not even just about risk, it's about being comfortable taking on debt. I was never comfortable taking on debt. And I feel that small business owners, in terms of that mindset, are probably going to be more risk averse. And the more entrepreneurial mindset is going to understand risk and understand debt and how to use debt to their advantage. Whereas for me, I always wanted to make sure that, I had plenty of debt coming out of optometry school, over $200,000 in student loans. And, you buy a house and now you're in debt and you got to pay this mortgage every month. There's just so much risk that I feel that is even appropriate and intelligent to take on at once.
And
But it
rightfully so,
seems
like that would weigh on you a lot on a daily basis, which is great in one point. One aspect
mm,
is what made it part of the drive to succeed was like, you had to succeed because you couldn't fail. That was not an option. And there is something to that, I think, with small business owners.
right. And I think that, yeah, I think it was Tom Brady who had said that the reason that he thinks that he was so successful is that he never had a plan B. So it's just that single-minded focus of going to do this and I'm going to do this well. And, when I talk with students or younger colleagues, I can't believe I've been doing this for 18, almost coming on 19
Oh
years
my
now
God.
in practice. But that it's do your job for the right reasons, and show up and be authentic, and the success will come if you have that mentality and you bring value to the table, because I don't feel like any business is successful unless you provide value to people. And I just happen to have an expertise within vision care and doing our specialty work in vision therapy, that the value came even though, and the business grew, even though we might not be considered I'm not considered, maybe not considered an entrepreneur or big business. um, I don't necessarily feel the need to get there, and we wouldn't be where we are without your influence in terms of your big ideas and moving forward and bringing in holistic dry eye care with something like IPL. Like, these are things that you talked about before. I was a hard no when it first
Well,
came.
I now know how to approach you with my ideas. Give my idea.
Yeah, let's hear this.
Okay, so let's unpack this on the phone. I will have the big idea, or I'll talk to one of the other doctors in the practice that wants to implement something. I, to a fault, will be like, great idea, amazing, let's do it right now. I know I have to bring that idea to you. I know you're going to immediately say no. And then I do know that a day or two later, you are going to come back to me and bring it up and say, okay, tell me a little bit more about that. Or why do you think this could be successful? Where do we need to implement this and why? And then if I can answer those questions and have those on the ready, then you are a lot more open and receptive to taking on that risk of buying this expensive piece of equipment or bringing somebody on, to fulfill a role. And, going back to that point earlier, I wish people could see, like, you worked out of the tiniest office possible in Park Ridge and saw so many patients out of there until you were busting at the seams and could not see one more patient in that office. And then you moved into the big, beautiful space. And I do commend you for waiting to do that, because some people would come out of optometry school and say, all right, I need a 3,500 square foot, perfectly done, pristine place. And the patients will come, and you did the opposite. You're like, no, I can work in this space and I'm going to build it to the very top until we have to move. And that's what you did. And I think that, like I said, that is probably the better way to go. That seems like the more secure way.
Yeah. And, we've talked about this before too, in terms of there is no one right way, right? I'm sure it does work in terms of having somebody come out, and I know it does work. I've seen it work before, where people come out of school and take on all that debt and build a big, beautiful office. So I think that at the end of the day, there's different ways to be successful. And as long as you can pay the bills and keep the doors open, and you provide value for people, then I think that you'll be successful, whether or not you grow slow, or you take on the debt and try to grow quick.
Mhm.
For me, I'll never forget the main motivation to move outside of not being able to see any more patients out of a 700 square foot office was, one of our specialties is in myopia control and helping children's prescription not get worse over time. And a patient was referred and they drove an hour, and the kid came to this 700 square foot office that was, designed in 1958, and said, this is the specialty office that we got referred to. And that's when I turned to you and said, all right, I think it's time to move.
Let's go. And then it was full speed ahead.
Right. Yeah. And taking on that risk and seeing the bigger picture was definitely something that never been comfortable with. But, to grow, they say to embrace discomfort, and it usually means you're headed in the right direction. And for somebody who likes to play it safe, it's definitely still not easy to do.
Well, I think a huge piece of this that we brushed over briefly was creating that awareness piece. Years ago, we would have had no real awareness around our different upbringings, what that made, what that did to our personality, how that impacts our decisions. And so, I'll let you speak for yourself, but like for me growing up, my dad was an entrepreneur, my grandpa, very much an entrepreneur. So for us, it was like, I grew up in a world of like, hey, I got this idea. Let's go test it out. My dad owned several different businesses and was not worried about something failing. It was like, let's see what can happen and let's see where this can go and let's have some fun with it. And it was never, let's make sure this is a fully functioning, analyzed business decision. And so thinking more on the fly and having that creative component to it was very much encouraged, in the way that I grew up. And so that does impact a lot of my decisions, but it helps because now I can slow down. Now I know that about myself. So if I do have a big idea, I can step back and put a little bit more thought into it before I execute it, which
Mm.
thank God, because who knows, I'd be on my eighth different type of podcast at this point.
Right. And, for me, growing up in a very conservative household, and I would say that, my background in terms of the family dynamic that I grew up in, it almost was that you can't be successful unless you sacrifice, and you always have to plan for the worst. And, it really does come from a mindset and a place of overall lack versus abundance. And it's not that, oh, don't worry, things will work out in your favor. It's that you better be prepared for the worst, and you better be fighting tooth and nail, and working your tail off and working to the bone and burning the candle at both ends, or else you're not going to be successful. And so for me, and that drive and that concern is definitely something that can lead to success, but it also can lead to burnout. And again, these are things that, like you said, we weren't even aware of. So for us to be, get together and get married and have kids and, start
Start
these businesses,
businesses.
and for you to be doing your purse line and working in television production and coming up with, even the podcast, it's like such a different world that I'm used to, that for me, it's incredibly important to have that awareness, so that when we have conversations, we can come to a place where we understand where each other is coming from, even though you and I might have very different opinions about the same topic, or we might interpret a situation completely differently, even though we were both in the same room. So
Right.
understanding that has been a game changer for our relationship and our business too.
For sure. And not trying to change the other person.
Yeah, and I'm grateful to have the experiences that I have, and one of the biggest things that I've learned from that is from my new favorite mentor, Michael Singer, that you and I have talked about plenty,
Mm-hmm.
is, get your ego out of it. And that has been so crucial for me, that, the steps that he talks about, and I've boiled it down to 3, which is accept reality, whatever is happening. He talks about surrender, which is really surrendering your emotions and your ego, and then act on it. And I had this conversation with a student of mine the other day, and it really does put you in the best position when you recognize that we say, like, leave your personal stuff at the door when you walk into the practice. It's not just, we want you focused on work, and we don't want you to have emotions and have issues that you're dealing with in your personal life. But that if you can make decisions without being emotional, then you're able to make decisions based on logic and not bring yourself into it. And
Mm-hmm.
so once I really started to understand that, thankfully earlier in my career, I was able to understand that. And I'll shout out a colleague of mine, a mentor of mine who recently passed away, Dr. Bob Sennett, was really key in this, that this isn't about you. This is about giving the best advice, the best experience that you have, sharing that with your patients to lead to the best outcomes.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it.
Accept, surrender, act.
Yeah. And a good Michael Singer concept for those that have listened to him. Highly recommend his book if you haven't read that book yet, but that
Untethered soul.
that you're not your thoughts and your feelings, you're the observer of them. So taking a step back when you're having these moments, or if you work with your spouse and you're coming up with different plans and goals, is not acting on different feelings that are coming up or that are getting triggered during that, and really taking a step back and observing it and making a much more informed, logical decisions.
Yeah. I think that could be very helpful.
Okay, so we're running out of time, but I do think this could be more of a regular conversation we keep having. But for those listening, I do want to wrap it up with the thought around gaining some awareness of, are you a small business mindset or are you an entrepreneurial mindset? Not one is better than the other, but just gaining some awareness around your thoughts and feelings with that.
I think it'd be really helpful. It has been for me.
All right, thanks for coming on, and I'll see you in the kitchen.
See you soon.
Thanks for listening to Nothing Small About Business. Make sure you follow this show so you don't miss the value in upcoming episodes. Share this with someone who's growing, and connect on socials for more.